Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, the GEO Group, and the Management and Training Corporation combined own over 200 facilities in the nation,
with over 150,000 bed spaces for a total profit of close to $5 billion per year.
Private prisons profit like a hotel. The more occupants that go in, the more money comes out.
You just sell it like you're selling cars, or real estate, or hamburgers.
Private prisons rely on anti-immigrant laws that guarantee them access to fresh inmates.
Here's how they do it. The American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, is an extreme right-wing membership organization comprised of state legislators and powerful multinational corporations, including the Corrections Corporation of America.
ALEC is the most active private prison lobbyist group pushing for anti-immigrant laws like Arizona's SB 1070.
Russell Pierce, like CCA, is an ALEC member, one with obscure ties to national white separatist neo-Nazi groups. During an ALEC meeting, CCA and Pierce crafted a model legislation that became, almost word for word, Arizona's SB 1070.
Whether people are undocumented or not doesn't matter,
as long as they fill the detention facilities for days, months, or even years.
SB 1070 and their copycat laws sprouting up across the country represent the perfect money machine.
So there was no white race, but in the colonies of what would become the United States, what did we see in the 1660s, 1670s? We began to see that Africans of indentured servant status, many of them not enslaved yet, they were not necessarily permanently enslaved. Some were, others were indentured, like many poor Europeans, for periods of 7 to 11 years. They could work off their indenture and then they would be free labor technically. Realized, as did the white indentured servants, the Europeans who hadn't even been called white yet, that they had a lot of things in common, like the fact that they were all getting their clock cleaned by the elite. And so they would get together, more than our history books taught us, to foment rebellion against the elite, to try to get a better deal for themselves on the basis of economic necessity and economic justice. And what did the elite do? When you see that you're outnumbered by black and white folks who are penniless, landless, peasants, you have to do one of two things. You either have to kill them all, but you can't do that because who's going to work? Rich folks weren't going to. So you can't kill them, but you can co-opt them. And so the elite in Virginia, for example, in the colony, begins to give certain carrots to people of European descent, saying things like, you know, we're going to let you own a little land. Not much, but just a little. And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. Now you're free labor. And by the way, once you're free labor, you get 50 acres of land. Just because you're free labor, see? So we're going to cut you in on this deal. We're going to let you enter into contracts. We're going to let you testify in court. And here's the best of all. We're going to put you on the slave patrol to keep those people in line. Right? The idea was, you're still going to get your clock cleaned. We still don't like you. We still aren't going to really empower you or change your economic subordination, but we're going to make you honorary members of this team, and you're going to help us keep those other people down. And so they got a little taste of power, and it did effectively divide and conquer those coalitions. Those rebellions began to stop almost instantly.
The strategy was to divide blacks and whites by creating an artificial color line. It's at this moment when race and racism radically alters the system of forced labor that had been practiced by human civilizations for thousands of years by injecting race into the equation. It's clear that the colonial elite were deeply concerned about the potential for blacks and poor whites to join forces. Notice that at about the same time as Bacon's Rebellion, we start to see in the colonies laws that transform slave status from a relatively ambiguous institution to an institution associated exclusively with blacks. Many have argued that this was a strategy to create a color line between blacks and poor whites, by elevating the status of poor whites just enough to keep the giddy multitude at bay, and to create an artificial incentive for poor whites to protect status which was only slightly better than that of black slaves. Any African American caught in the commission of a crime was committed to slavery for life, while white indentured servants simply had years added to their term. Slave status would now be based on the status of the mother. This was an odd development in a patrilineal society, but it also marks the beginning of perpetual slavery, in which slavery is passed down from generation to generation. By 1691, there were also laws against abominable mixture, or miscegenation, where it was common previously for black men and white women to marry. It was now illegal. At the same time, slave status is based on the status of the mother. There's an actual economic incentive for white slave owners to rape black slave women.
I think any honest observer of American racial history has to acknowledge that the rules and reasons the legal system employs for enforcing status relations evolve and change as they're challenged. In the first chapter of the book, I describe the cyclical rebirths of racial caste in America. Since our nation's founding, African Americans have repeatedly been controlled through institutions like slavery and Jim Crow, which appear to die, but then are reborn in new form, tailored to the needs and constraints of the time. For example, following the Civil War, a new system of control emerged to replace slavery, called convict leasing.
That effectively re-enslaved enormous numbers of people. And what that was all about, what that was rooted in, was that the Southern economy, and in a way the American economy, was addicted to slavery, was addicted to forced labor, and the South could not resurrect itself. And so there was this incredible economic imperative to bring back coerced labor, and they did on a huge scale.
You say they did it by criminalizing black life.
Of course, before the Civil War, there were slave codes, there were laws that governed the behavior of slaves, and that was the basis of laws, for instance, that made it where a slave had to have a written pass to leave their plantation and go and travel on an open road. Well, immediately after the Civil War, all the southern states adopted a new set of laws that were then called black codes, and they essentially attempted to recreate the slave code.
The prison system contains obvious vestiges of slavery. Right? The 13th Amendment abolished slavery for all except those who are being punished for committing a crime. So in a lot of ways, what we see in the penitentiary system in this country is the continuation of the system of slavery.
Well, I believe our criminal justice system has been used once again to effectively recreate caste in America. Now, I'm sure there's at least one person, probably more, in this room who's thinking, what is she talking about? Our criminal justice system isn't a caste system, it's a system of crime control. If black folks would just stop committing so many crimes, they wouldn't have to worry about being rounded up, locked up, and stripped of their basic civil and human rights. And therein lies the biggest myth about mass incarceration, namely that it's been driven by crime or crime rates. It's not true. It's absolutely not true. Our prison population quintupled in 30 years, went from about 350,000 to well over 2 million for reasons that have stunningly little to do with crime or crime rate. So what does explain this explosion in incarceration, in black and brown incarceration in the United States, if not crime rates? Well, the answer is the war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, the wave of punitiveness that washed over the United States. In fact, drug convictions alone accounted for about 2/3 of the increase in the federal system and more than half of the increase in the state system between 1985 and 2000, the period of the drug war's greatest escalation. Now, to get a sense of how large a contribution the drug war has made to mass incarceration, consider this. There are more people in prison and jail today just for drug offenses than were incarcerated for all reasons in 1980. Drug convictions have increased more than 1,000% since the drug war began.
The first drug laws, enacted at the state and local level, are aimed at Mexicans in the Southwest, former African slaves who've moved to big cities, and perhaps the most foreign of all to America, the Chinese. They have come to San Francisco as a gateway to the West to build the railroads, but they immediately become the targets of exclusion laws and prejudice.
It became illegal to wear a ponytail down your back. It became illegal to carry water suspended by poles in the city of San Francisco. It became illegal to have a particular kind of laundry in the city. There were just lots of laws passed to harass and to get rid of the Chinese.